Question number 6, Jami-Lee Ross.
Mr Speaker, my question is to the Minister for Building and Housing and asks, what steps has the government taken to dismantle Auckland Urban Limits that were identified by the Productivity Commission report in 2012 as a key problem for the city's housing supply and affordability?
Mr Speaker.
The Honourable Dr Nick Smith.
Mr Speaker, the first step was in 2013 creating special housing areas. This enables new housing estates to be approved beyond the urban limit, and to date this has provided capacity for 27,000 homes in Auckland beyond the old urban limit. The second step was fast-tracking a new unitary plan to replace those urban limits permanently, and that process only has weeks to run. The third step is the RMA reform bill before the Parliament, which puts a new specific requirement on councils to provide for land supply. And the fourth step is a new national policy statement that would not allow councils in future to reinvent metropolitan urban limits.
Supplementary.
Order. Order. Supplementary question, Jami-Lee Ross.
Supplementary question. What comments and reports has he seen of adverse consequences of removing Auckland's urban limits?
Mr Speaker.
The Honourable Dr Nick Smith.
Mr Speaker, I've read reports that the 2012 Productivity Commission report recommending an end to urban limits was an ideological burp from dinosaurs of the extreme right and was best ignored. I've also read a statement saying Dr Smith's threat to get rid of Auckland's metropolitan urban limit is total nonsense. It will allow massive urban sprawl and completely unsustainable urban development. I have another statement in which wholesale destruction of the city limits is the last thing that Aucklanders want to see. It will allow suburban sprawl to rip across the countryside from Whangarei.
Order. Member will resume his seat. That question is not going to help, or the answer is not going to help.
Order.
Oh, point of order, the Honourable Gerry Brownlee.
Mr Speaker, it was a reasonable question. Well, it was. And while the Minister might have taken too long to read some of the extremely strong quotes that were offered by someone, it would be nice for the House to know exactly who said those things.
Yeah. No. It wasn't an unreasonable answer. It went on for far too long, and I listened very, very carefully. I was left in little doubt that it was going to then be in breach of Speaker's ruling 1744, and I'm sure that I'm right. Point of order, the Honourable Gerry Brownlee.
Supplementary question.
No, I need to deal with the point of order first, I suspect.
Mr Speaker, it wasn't necessary to identify the source of the comments.
This better be a point of order, Mr Smith. Supplementary question, Gerry Brownlee.
Mr Speaker, I didn't quite hear what the point of order was. My question is, who was the genius personality that made those comments?
No, there's no responsibility for that. Supplementary question, Jami-Lee Ross.
Supplementary question. Does the Minister recall any reports of dozens of hoardings being erected in Auckland in 2013 with his mugshot on it, which decried his policy of overriding the urban limits and which advocated a compact city? And if so, has he subsequently heard from the authors of those hoardings of any change in position?
Order. No. Order. I'll deal with the point of order in a minute. As I call the Minister to answer that question, if in any way it breaches 1744, and it is simply a question designed to attack the opposition, I will deal with it very, very severely. Now, there's a point of order.
Mr Speaker.
The Right Honourable.
Mr Speaker, I'm very reluctant to do this, but no backbencher should describe a minister as being a mug, no matter how appropriate the description might be.
And that's hardly going to help the order of the House. Does the Minister wish to answer the question?
Yes,
I suspect it's very unwise.
Yes, Mr Speaker, I do recall those hoardings, although it was not my best side, or there probably isn't a best side in my case. In respect of Labor's change in position, actually I welcome it, because we can have now a far more intelligent discussion about what will make a difference to Auckland families on housing.
Question number 7, Bill Twyford.